On November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall crumbled beneath the sledgehammer blows of a jubilant crowd. The entire world watched this scene as a victory of freedom over tyranny. But if you had opened the Kremlin's accounting ledgers that evening, you would have discovered a very different truth. The Soviet Union had been dying for years, suffocated by a financial hemorrhage that nobody could stop. The fall of communism looked like a political revolution. In reality, it was the greatest bankruptcy in human history. Here's how an empire armed with 40,000 nuclear warheads found itself unable to buy bread to feed its citizens. To understand this monumental insolvency, we must return to the moment when Soviet leaders believed they had hit the jackpot. The year was 1965. In the frozen expanses of Western Siberia, Soviet geologists made a discovery that would transform the fate of the 20th century. They found oil, specifically the Samotlor field. This petroleum deposit represented a sea of black gold stretching beneath the frozen earth. At the time, this finding seemed miraculous. The Soviet economy was already slowing dangerously. The communist system struggled to produce consumer goods that people actually desired. But suddenly the solution appeared obvious. Why manufacture high-performance cars or modern televisions when you can simply drill holes in the ground? Throughout the 1970s, the price of oil exploded. The OPEC embargo against the West propelled prices toward dizzying heights, and the Soviet Union became the principal beneficiary of this windfall. Billions of dollars in hard currency flooded toward Moscow. The Kremlin had just won the largest lottery ever organized in Russian history. Yet this sudden wealth constituted a disguised curse. The petrodollars masked the structural rot of the economy. Since petroleum revenues arrived so easily, Soviet leaders ceased attempting any serious reform. Why modernize factories when crude sales suffice? Why improve agriculture when hydrocarbons bring in enough to import food? The Soviet Union became a typical rentier state, a third-world economy equipped with first-world rockets. The Soviets stopped manufacturing products that the rest of the planet wanted to purchase. They exported raw materials and imported absolutely everything else. They traded the blood of the earth for provisions, machines, and silence. The Kremlin leadership used the petroleum windfall to buy the loyalty of the masses. Authorities subsidized food prices, keeping bread artificially cheap. They subsidized housing. They financed the satellite states of Eastern Europe. They built a colossal military machine that devoured 20% of GDP. The Soviet Golden Age rested on foundations of sand. The entire stability of the regime depended on a single figure: the price per barrel of oil on global markets. As long as the barrel exceeded $30, the Soviets felt wealthy, invincible. They could invade Afghanistan, threaten Europe, compete with the Americans in the space race. But in the early 1980s, the economic equations began to change dangerously. The United States and Saudi Arabia were watching carefully. Washington and Riyadh understood that the Soviet bear was actually an addict, and its drug was called expensive petroleum. On the commodity markets, a storm was brewing. Crude demand was declining as the West became more energy efficient. Simultaneously, new supply sources were appearing: the North Sea, Alaska. Prices wavered. Then the Soviet agricultural sector collapsed completely. Here's the part of the story that many forget. The Soviet Union, which possessed some of the most fertile arable land on the planet in Ukraine, could no longer even feed its own population. The collective farm system was so inefficient that half the potatoes rotted in the fields before reaching stores. The superpower therefore had to purchase grain, millions of tons. And from whom did they buy this vital wheat? From their sworn enemy, the United States. By the early 1980s, the Soviet Union was spending nearly half its hard currency receipts solely to import wheat intended to feed its people. The Soviets were selling oil to the West to buy back grain from this same West, a cycle of humiliation and total dependency. But the Kremlin remained confident. The leaders contemplated their petroleum charts and saw money flowing abundantly. They thought the party would last forever. They didn't realize at all that they were walking at the edge of a cliff and the ground would soon give way beneath their feet. The countdown toward economic apocalypse had just been triggered. The Soviet Union was preparing to confront the perfect economic storm, a convergence of catastrophes that would precipitate the end of a nuclear empire unable to pay its grocery bills. The year 1985 marks the beginning of the end. Mikhail Gorbachev enters the Kremlin. Young, energetic, he knows the system is stagnating, but even he doesn't realize how close the abyss lies. He believes the Soviet Union suffers from a simple cold. In reality, terminal cancer is already gnawing at the empire's vital organs. Gorbachev announces a grandiose plan called perestroika, the restructuring. He wants to modernize the economy, invest massively in mechanical industry, make Soviet production competitive on world markets. To finance these colossal investments, he counts on petroleum revenues. A fatal mistake. On September 13, 1985, the Saudi oil minister Ahmed Zaki Yamani declares that his kingdom has had enough of limiting production to maintain artificially elevated prices. Riyadh will open the floodgates. Saudi Arabia inundates the global market with cheap crude. The result? An economic massacre. In 1980, the barrel was worth $35. By 1986, it collapses to $10. For the Soviet Union, this fall equals a death sentence. In the blink of an eye, the empire loses half its revenues. Imagine suddenly losing half your salary while your mortgage payments, car installments, and grocery expenses remain identical. The Soviet budget had been calculated banking on expensive petroleum. Suddenly, a gaping chasm appears in the accounts. Tens of billions of dollars evaporate instantly. This catastrophe occurs at the worst possible moment. The Soviet Union is bogged down in a costly war in Afghanistan. Millions of dollars leave each day to support regimes in Cuba, Vietnam, Angola. Moscow attempts to maintain nuclear parity against the American Star Wars program. And always, the grain must be purchased. Grain ships arrive at Odessa every week, demanding payment in hard currency, dollars or gold. The Soviets cannot use rubles because their national currency remains a soft currency, worthless beyond the borders. Impossible to buy American wheat or German machines with rubles. Gorbachev faces a wrenching choice. Reducing military spending would provoke the general's anger. Cutting food subsidies would trigger popular fury. One option remains: borrowing. The Soviet Union begins contracting massive loans from Western banks. German, French, British institutions willingly accept. After all, this is a superpower. A superpower never goes bankrupt, right? The Soviets enjoy a perfect credit rating. They possess enormous gold reserves. The bet seems safe. The loans therefore flood in. But this money finances no productive investment, no factory capable of generating future profits. These funds serve only immediate survival. The Soviets borrow billions just to purchase food and consumer goods intended to prevent totally empty shelves. A typical debt spiral: they borrow to eat. Gorbachev then commits a domestic mistake that accelerates the collapse. He launches an anti-alcohol campaign. Seeing that vodka destroys the health of Soviet workers, he restricts sales and has vineyards destroyed. Morally, the decision seems justifiable. Economically, it constitutes suicide. The tax on vodka represented one of the state's most important revenue sources, just behind petroleum. By limiting alcohol sales, Gorbachev eliminates another enormous chunk of the budget, and people don't stop drinking anyway. They simply begin distilling homemade alcohol. The state therefore receives zero tax revenue. Sugar disappears from shops because citizens buy it massively to manufacture their moonshine. By 1988, the budget deficit spirals uncontrollably. The government then commits the forbidden act par excellence. It turns on the printing presses. Freshly printed rubles serve to pay workers' wages. But since stores offer no products to purchase, money simply accumulates in pockets.